Inside of today's video, we're going to be going through all 83 brawlers in the game, giving you guys the best build for them, especially with a bunch of balance changes and of course the meta shifting, and also just discovering some things from the pros. I think my opinion has definitely shifted on quite a few of these builds. Before we get into the video, I want to give a huge shout out to Warcraft Rumble for sponsoring today's video. Warcraft Rumble is an action-packed strategy game where you can assemble armies from your favorite characters from the Warcraft universe. And I'm having so much fun with this game, and I'm creating content over on my second channel, so make sure to check that out. Warcraft Rumble is the perfect mix of Blizzard quality games that everybody loves on PC, but in mobile form, where games are lasting from 3 to 5 minutes, so it's the perfect game to pick up and play on the go. Given the strategic nature of the game, Warcraft Rumble caters to a variety of genres like RTS, 4-time strategy, tower defense, and deck building. It's truly a game for everybody to enjoy. The beauty of the game is that it's easy to learn but difficult to master, and even with myself, I have no experience of the Warcraft universe, and I've been submerged into the game for months because there's just so much content to enjoy and there's just endless fun. So if you guys want to try out the game for yourself, make sure to click the link in the description below, and a big thank you again for Warcraft Rumble for sponsoring today's video. So I'll be putting a timestamp in the description if you just want to skip to your brawler. It is in alphabetical order as well, so you can easily just follow along. So let's jump into it then. So with 8-bit, I think it's pretty easy. So in terms of every single game mode outside of Heist, you use cheat cartridge, Heist extra credits, and I use booster pretty much all of the time, probably in gem grab, or if you're facing off against his counters like snipers, etc. You probably want to use plugged in, but booster is the go-to most of the time. 8-bit is a hard one to decide. If I was to decide 2 solid gears for him, it would simply be the health gear and the reload gear, because you're pretty much always going to get value out of reload. You're always going to get value out of the health gear, considering he's got a lot of HP. And then sometimes on a grassier map, I probably would opt for something like this. So next up, we've got Amber. With Amber, pretty much all the time you want to use Dancing Flames, even since the nerf. It's still better, especially to defend Amber. But maybe if you're facing off against snipers, you could switch over to this, but you may as well go with that. Wild Flames 100% of the time. You want to use a reload gear every single time as well. And Amber's very flexible as well, so it's all dependent on what map you play. Grassy map, Vision Gear is very, very good on Amber. And then maybe elsewhere, Mythic Gear isn't the best, but I don't know, if you want to get it, you can get it. I just like to go between like damage and then maybe like the extra gadget to protect yourself against assassins. So we have Angelo. So with Angelo, he's got 2 good gadgets. You want to use Sting and Flight on maybe a map, or probably gem grab where you want to like jump away for safety. It's a good gadget, you can never go wrong with it. I think the pros are starting to use Master Fletcher a lot more, especially when they know they're not facing assassins. This is really good. You combine it with your super, you can deal so much damage behind the wall, and the opponents never expect it, so it's guaranteed shot most of the time if you time it correctly. And then in terms of star powers, Empower is better most of the time. I will say though, there is value in flow, especially if you're on Canal Grande. I think there's a really watery map or knockout, which is really cheesy. This is actually good because for Angelo, you don't actually cycle through your supers as frequent as before. So in terms of the gears then, I think actually underrated. I'm going to actually pop the health gear on because it's actually hard to cycle through to your supers now with Angelo. So I would go with like the health gear, maybe like damage or shield as well. You can never really go wrong with it. I think health gear is actually pretty good on Angelo now. Next up, we have Ash. So in terms of his gadgets, Chill Pill, even since the recent buff to Run Banana, it's just not that great from what I've experienced. I don't know, maybe people have got a different experience, but I just like Chill Pill because it combines really well with his super. First Bash, you want to use all the time, and then speed and damage, you never want to switch away from those on Ash. Next up, we've got Barley. So this is a really difficult one because nothing's right or wrong with his build. He's got a really strong build overall. So, of course, facing off against tanks, you want to use Sticky Syrup, and especially on ladder, you probably want to go with this because you're probably going to face off against Darryl, Mortis, etc. But, you know, if the matchup's right, if you play a lot of ranks, this is very, very good, especially in Hot Zone. I think that's the best use case for it. Super strong gadget. And then, again, both star powers are pretty good. Against other throwers, you want to use Medical Use. There are some matchups, though, where the damage star power does help you out. If you're facing tanks, you probably want to use this as well. Both of them are pretty good. It depends on your play style. I use Medical Use most of the time. And then with gears, I just go for something like this because, you know, if you're healing it up all of the time with this star power, then you don't really get much value out of the damage gears. So yeah, that's what my thought process is on Barley. Next up, we've got B. So pretty much all the time I use Rattled Hive. It's just good for early pressure. If you're facing off against snipers, and a gene, or just a gene as well to tank a gene pool. Honey molasses can be good. Next, we've got star powers, so I pretty much use honeycomb all of the time because B is super squishy and it just helps you get a lot more pressure on the map. But I wouldn't discredit you from going insta B load as well. This can be pretty good as well to spam out 3k shots. Next up, we've got the gears, so I pretty much never switch away from this, to be honest, because damage, you know, if you've got a big sting with damage gear, it's just insane. And then shield gear because B is squishy. Next, we've got Belle. So with Belle, both gadgets can be useful. Nest egg is pretty much useful all of the time. And then reverse polarity can be good in a few maps, like, well, knockout. I like this, for example. I like it out in the open. It can be pretty underrated, but nest egg is a safe bet. Positive feedback all of the time. But I will say there is an underrated use case for Belle, especially if the opponent goes like a Mortis. That's very prevalent in the meta. Darryl, then on like knockout and bounty, you can use the star power. But yeah, it's safe to go positive feedback. It is definitely the better one. And then I pretty much never really switch away from this build, mainly because Belle's pretty squishy and you always get value out of the reload gear. Next up, we've got Berry. So Berry, you want to go friendship, is great everywhere, but on heist you want to go with this gadget because you can get, I think, 10%. Is it 10% or 20%? I can't remember top of my head. I think it might be 20% with one shot, which is insane. And then of course with Berry all the time, you're going to go floor is fine. This one just makes no sense. It's just a terrible star power. Makes no sense. You want to go with this one all of the time. And then you can see by my gears, I pretty much go with this, mainly because Berry has healing tied to him, so I just don't get the most value out of damage gear because I'm pretty much always healing up with Berry. So I go with this setup. And then finally, Bibi. In terms of gadgets, this gadget every single time. Star powers, you want to be going home run pretty much all of the time. Sometimes you can get value out of batting stance, but I think home run is a better one. And then really never switch away from these gears. So now moving on to Bo, starting off with his gadgets. Both gadgets are pretty lackluster. I use Super Totem most of the time, but you will get some value from Tripwire, inside of Brubble and other places, but I just like Super Totem. In terms of star powers, Snare Bear pretty much everywhere. If you like playing Showdown on a few grassy maps, this can be pretty decent, but that is, of course, really good. And then in terms of the gears, I think reload speed all of the time, and then it's up to your personal preference. I am starting to like this setup a little bit more, just because it allows you to sustain in the battle a little bit longer, and of course Bo is secretly a little bit tanky. Next we have Bonnie's. So Bonnie's is a no-brainer. Sugar Rush 100%, Black Powder 100%, and then with gears as well, you want to use this setup every single time, mainly because Bonnie is absolutely terrible without this Sugar Rush gadget, so you've got to use this combination for sure. Next up we have Brock. So again, pretty simple for him. I think if he was playing a lot of ladder and not knowing the composition you're facing, Rocket Laces can be pretty decent, but most time you use up Brock to break open the wall, you know, like out in the open, and just other scenarios to counter the opposition. So rocket fuel is better overall. More rockets is the better star power over 100%. That's what the pros use. Sometimes you might want to opt for rocket number 4 and knockout, but I still prefer more rockets because you can confirm the kills so easily with the super. And then in terms of gears, I go with this setup inside of heist, and then everywhere else I go with the shield. Of course, he's super squishy. Next up we have Bull. So Bull, pretty simple. I use Stomper everywhere. I've seen a few pros, they like to use T-Bone Injector in heist, and you can go with that if you're literally going for a base race type of play, but I think Stomper is the better gadget. It's so good. And then in terms of builds, you could opt for Berserker and this gadget combination in heist, and everywhere else you could probably go with this. I use Tough Guy most of the time though. And then with Bull, it depends on, I don't know, it depends whether you're peak or not. If you're peaker, you probably want to go with this setup. Everybody else, you probably want to go, depending whether it's a grassy map. I think Health Gear is very good on Bull because he has a lot of bad matchups, so you'll be able to heal up a lot and farm your super through taking damage. So I like to go something like this or something like that. So next up we've got Buster, slow-mo replay 100%, Kevlar vest 100%, and then this setup every time really. I mean, the extra gadget gear can be pretty decent overall, but I think the damage gear really helps him win certain interactions, so I go with that most of the time. And then next we have Buzz, so I go with this gadget. And then X-ray shades is going to be good on some super grassy maps, can be pretty good, but for the most part you want this, especially because it combines really well with his hypercharge. And in terms of his gears, I pretty much go this. Buzz, I go a lot of the time on non-grassy maps, to be honest, so this is what setup I go for, but you can opt to go for different things. Of course you can go for that. I feel like you do need a damage gear though to win certain interactions, especially up close. Next up we got Byron. So with Byron, I use boost shots pretty much all of the time really. I mean, if you're a super defensive Byron player, you could go with that, but you get so much value out of booster shots. You can cycle through super so quickly. Again, melee's pretty much all of the time. Sometimes injection can be good if you're literally only going to heal. For example, if you go like Byron double tank, then injection is going to be better. But melee's is so good, such an underrated star power. And then I go for this setup because I want to be spamming gadgets galore. Byron squishy, and of course booster shots is pretty strong. Next we've got Colt. So a lot of people are using heat ejector. That can be a good gadget in heist and maybe in an unfavorable matchup against tanks, but I think this gadget is starting to be overused. I'm gonna be real, like people aren't using flying hook when you could use it in gem grab, you know, to fly onto the gem carrier, on bounty where you can get the first start, etc. Flying hook is the better gadget overall, but heist, you do use this gadget. It is pretty good there. And then for Carl, as you can see, normally I go for something like this. The extra gadget is really good, and then damage gear or health gear depending on the matchup, and then of course protective pirouette all the time. Lastly, we got Charlie. So Spider's gadget's going to be good into sharpshooters. It's the better gadget most of the time. Of course, if you're in ranks and you're facing off against like Sandy, Buster, etc., those pierce brawlers, personal space is just going to be better, and it's sometimes underrated, but you have to get the timing right. And then with star powers, if you're facing off against tanky brawlers, digestive, and then slimy, I mean both star powers are a bit meh at the minute, don't really improve Charlie too much, but slimy can be good. Even if you miss, you get value out of it. And then in terms of gadgets, gear, sorry, I go with this setup mainly because I use 4 sets of spiders. Is really good for spam, and then damage gear, you can never really go wrong with that. So now moving on to chest design after the gadgets. So spicy dice is the best competitive option. I will say candy beans is underrated, and I've got a lot of good use case out of him, but now that he's meta, I do think spicy dice is better because you can change your super and hopefully get the dynamite one, which is going to enable you to score goals in brawl ball, etc. And then of course single Bella mania every single time. Then in terms of chest, so it does depend on whether you're on a grassy map or not. Outside of the grassy maps, I do actually like to go something like this. The health gear is pretty underrated on him. You can never go wrong with the shield gear on him as well. And then of course grassy maps, he's very good with this combination. Next up we have Chuck. So with Chuck, most of the time you probably want to be using rerouting, mainly because there might be some bad matchups where you might not be able to get a post onto the high safe, so you can actually just zoom onto that post, press the gadget, and then throw a post even further onto the high safe. So that's where it's better. Ghost Train's going to be good on maps with a lot of walls. You know, I'm thinking parallel plates, for example. You want to be using Ghost Train. Both are pretty good. And then I think most of the time pit stop is better. Tickets please is just good when you don't need 4 posts. But to be honest, like star powers, these and gadgets aren't really the most needed with Chuck. And in terms of gears, I go with this setup. The health gear allows you to get back in the action a lot more with Chuck, and of course damage, because the main reason you use Chuck is to deal damage onto the high safe. Next we've got Clancy. So with Clancy, you want to be using snappy shooting pretty much all of the time. I mean the dash can be pretty useful, especially because it reloads 1 ammo, so maybe on really tough matchups the dash might actually help you out. But you use Clancy mainly to face off against tanks, right? If you pair this with a super, it's so good. And in terms of star powers, definitely choose Recon. It's by far the better option, mainly because you want to get out that first level as quickly as possible. Whereas this one, I feel like it might be a bit underrated, mainly because his super's been nerfed now, so you might get more value out of it, but I still use Recon. And then I would just pretty much go with this setup. You can't really go wrong with that on Clancy. And next we've got Colette. So with Colette, gotcha 100%. I use mass attacks pretty much all the time, because even though push it can be good, but I've said so many times, it leaves you so vulnerable, and still so many brawlers can attack you whilst you're pushing the opponent back. So I sometimes I just don't really understand this star power. I like mass attacks, that's what I use. And then you can never really go wrong with this setup. Of course in heist you might want to opt for something like that, but yeah, definitely want the extra gadget with Colette. Next up we've got Colt. So in terms of Colt, it depends on how you're playing him. You know, on heist and most situations, speed loader is going to be better, but there are a lot of instances, especially on ranked, where you want to be using silver bullet. You know, on penalty kick, for example, to open up the map. Silver bullet is good. Both gadgets are good, and again, both star powers are good with Colt. I think probably the best option is slick boots, but I use Magnum Special. Again, it can be personal preference. I think Slick Boots is better, though. I'm just a bad speed Colt. And then in terms of the gears, you can never really go wrong with this. Use Colt for damage, right? So you may as well go with damage gear and the reload gear 100% of the time. Next, we've got Cordelius. So Cordelius replanting is by far the better gadget, competitively speaking. Poison Mushroom is good, If you know you're facing off against tanks, or if you're on a super bushy map, then Poison Mushroom will be pretty good because you can take down people pretty quickly, and it combines really well with super. But Replanting, really good at dodging attacks, jumping over walls to take down throwers, for example. It is the better gadget for sure. And then in terms of star powers, Combo Shrooms is the one that's used mostly by the pros. But if you have an unfavorable matchup, I think Mushroom Kingdom is pretty good because you can get that healing inside of the Shadow Realm. And then I go with pretty much the damage and the +1 gear all of the time. You can probably opt for something like this as well, but yeah, can never really go wrong with the +1 with Cordelius. And then Crow, you want to be using slow toxing all of the time, even since it's nerf. It is the better gadget overall. Just got to make sure that you're pairing this with like a sniper, or just making sure that you got a teammate close by to take action on the slowing. And in terms of star powers, both are pretty good. You're using Carrying Crow definitely inside of Heist, and then maybe everywhere else use extra toxic, might find more value. And then in terms of gears, I actually opt for +1 and the mythic gear, especially when you're playing Heist and just going for pure damage. But maybe on bad matchups, you might want to swap to something like this, because of course Crow is super squishy, so you do need that extra shield with him. But the gadget is the main reason why I use Crow, because of course the gadget's really good. So next we've got Darryl. So his kit is actually really underwhelming, and a lot of people are questioning what to really use since this became meta, and it's a tough one. I use Top Barrel a lot, but if I'm facing a really tough matchup and I'm not going to be able to get my super early on, I started to use Recall and Rotator a little bit, mainly because, you know, first 30 seconds you're terrible, so you could probably want that, but you especially use this in Heist. I know Top Barrel is pretty good, especially with 2 rolls right now. In terms of star powers, Steel Hoops definitely is the better star power still, because you just get that additional damage reduction, and then you get another super on top of that, and then that's basically like 4 seconds worth of damage reduction with this star power, which is really good. Rolling Reload is definitely the better one in Heist now. It's actually a really good combination. And then with gears, I never really swap away from this because you don't really need anything else. Of course, if you're playing it on grassy map, you can go with that. So essentially you want the damage gear all of the time. And then I don't know, I use health a lot on Darryl as well. And then lastly we have Doug. So with Doug, you want to be going extra mustard every single time, self-service every single time, and then this matchup again every time, because you only really play Doug on grassy maps. You know, if you just want to be an idiot and use them in non-grassy maps, then go with health gear, but it's not much point. So now we're going to be moving on to Draco, starting it off with his gadget. Last Stand is by far the better gadget to use. Star power as well, Shredding is going to be your best bet all of the time as well. And then pretty much I only play Draco really on grassy maps. I mean, sometimes non-grassy maps, but I'll probably go with a shield gear, because with Draco, you're pretty much just going to keep chaining and chaining your supers until you die, so I don't think the health gear is that needed. Next, we've got Dynamite, of course, Satchel Charge and Demolition every single time, and then I go with this setup. Never really switch away from that. Edgar, again, pretty simple, Let's Fly, and then it does depend on the matchup. I still think Fisticuffs is probably the better one overall, mainly because it allows you to cycle your super a little bit easier and then cycle through to your Hypercharge, but I don't know, Edgar is regressing a little bit. Maybe he does need that extra. I don't know, both star powers are just a bit meh for me, so I don't really mind. And then in terms of setups, I do go for this a lot of the time. I just think Edgar needs as much help as possible now in matchups, whereas before, in his broken state, he could just go with literally something like this. But now he's starting to get worse. I think this is the best setup overall, so he can just... he needs help in that 1v1. Next we have Primo, so you want to be using the first gadget every time. And then star power, a lot of people tend to use El Fuego. I think Meteor Rush actually might be better. It allows you to make more plays, allows you to catch up to opponents, to cycle through to more supers. Again, it can depend on personal preference. I think a lot of the time with Primo, I end up going with something like this. I like the health gear on Primo because, let's face it, it's really hard to actually get close to opponents in this meta. So the health gear actually allows you to put up your super more frequently by taking damage. So that's why I really like it. If you have a really good matchup though, you can go with something like this for sure, because the supercharge gear, you're going to be able to spam through super so quickly. Next we have M's. With M's, Friend Zone 100%. And then star powers, I think Bad Karma is starting to be the better star power overall. I do like Hype though. I don't know why, I just can't let go of this star power because you can get a lot of value with it. I mean, if you play Brewable, probably Hype is better, but Bad Karma, you know, Heist, etc. And then in terms of, it just depends on the map. Damage gear, you can never go wrong with M's. And then it depends on the map, whether you want to go speed, grassy map, and of course everywhere else. You want the 4 knockbacks, which is actually pretty good. Next up we have Eve. This gadget 100% of the time, unnatural order pretty much all the time as well. you know, maybe you can get some value out of this when you face snipers, but it's not worth it. Unnatural order's better. And then reload speed, you want to buy and use all the time. And then gears, it's up to you. Mythic gear, I don't even know if the extra hatchling is even that great in this meta anymore. The hatchlings just get destroyed, so you might actually want to opt for something else, like the damage, shield, etc. Next, we've got Fang. So Fang, roundhouse kick is going to be a better option. I will say corn through is a little bit underrated though, but roundhouse kick allows you to get really good combinations and can stop opponents from, of course, taking you down with combos. And in terms of the meta, I actually think this is the better star power. I know a lot of people are like, well, fresh kicks can be really good. If you don't play a lot of like high trophy games and you're just in the average range, fresh kicks is going to be better because you're going to be able to chain a lot of supers. And then overall, you probably want to go with something like this. Of course, Fang being assassin, you do need that extra shield and damage. Next, Frank. So Frank's gadget did get nerfed. I still actually feel like it's a good gadget. 50% extra damage is good. But if you're playing it competitively, of course, it's going to be your better gadget overall because it helps you against your counters. In terms of star powers, power grab is definitely the better one, especially considering Frank is still really good. And again, depends what map you play on. Most of the time, you actually play Frank on a more open map, I would say. So the health gear and damage gear is going to be really good on him. And lastly, we have Gale. So Twister gadget pretty much all of the time. Spring ejector you can use on some hot zone maps like Parallel Blaze, Dueling Beetles, and a few other scenarios as well. Can be pretty underrated. Twister's good, of course, against those tanks. And then again, you can see I swap depending on the map. Grassy map, Gale is really good on, so you can go with something like this with the freezing snow star power. And then most other maps, I do actually use the blustery blow star power a lot more to just fully shut down tanks, and then of course cycle through so you can get your hypercharges. And then of course the stun star power is better with the hypercharge. You can make so many good plays with it. So again, it depends because both star powers are really good with Gale. So now we're going to be moving on to Gene, starting off with his gadget. Lamp blowout is going to be better mainly on like Brewable. Any grassy map is going to be better. Every open map, whether it be knockout and bounty as well, you probably want to go vengeful spirits. Of course, if you're playing ranked as well, if you're facing off against assassins, of course you go with the knockback. In terms of star powers, you want to be using magic puffs 90% of the time. You want to actually switch over to Spirit Slap if you are facing off against a lot more tanks because it can help you win that battle. And then in terms of gears, you pretty much go this setup all the time because you only really use Gene on grassy maps, of course, combined with a vision. But I don't know, let's say you play shooting star, then you probably want to slap on. You probably need like 3 gears with Gene, so whether you go with the shield or the health, that is advisable. And then Grey, you want to be going walking cane all of the time. Star powers depends on the game mode. New perspective in like gem grab, brewable. If you're facing off against snipers or if you're playing knockout bounty, you may as well go fake injury, combined really well with the gear and well, the shield gear and the +1. You can never go really wrong with that. Next we've got Griff. So Piggy Bank is going to be the better gadget. The other one is terrible. Star powers, business, resiliency, can never really go wrong with that. And again, it does depend on what kind of map you play Griff on. If you really need to open up the map, then of course you want to go with the extra gadget. That's why I use Griff to open up the map. And then, you know, if you're just playing Griff, I don't know, Kaboom Canyon for example, then health gear is going to pair really well with him. Next we've got Grom. So Grom returning to the meta. Radio check is by far the better gadget, but there are some underrated use cases where, I don't know, center stage, double swoop. There's a few other instances where this can be a good gadget, so you could opt for that, but radio check is definitely the better one. X Factor is definitely the better one, and then you probably want to go with this setup or this setup. I think because Grom can deal a crap ton of damage, you might want to just use the damage gear on top of that because you can deal insane damage. But again, it does depend what type of player you are. You can get 4 uses of that gadget, which can confirm you more kills. Next up, we've got Gus, Cookie Popper, 100%, Spirit Animal, 100%. And then in terms of gears, I like to swap a lot with Gus, to be honest. I never switch off the +1 though, because you can get 4 chances to get kills, especially since the damage buff to this gadget is really good. And then yeah, it depends. You can go with health, you can go with damage, you can go with shield. I end up going with health or damage nowadays. It's just the type of player I am. A lot more defensive now. And next up we have Milky Boy Hank, Barricade 100% of the time. I've seen people swap between both of these star powers. I don't know, take cover can be good with on a lot of maps with a lot of walls, but you know, you want to catch up to opponents, so that you use the star power most of the time. And then I use this setup because with Hank, you're pretty much always charging up your bullet ball, and it's hardly any space to heal up. So I just go with the extra gadget. I don't know why. I mean, probably you want to go with something like this. So next up, we've got Jacky. So of course, this gadget every time, counter crusher every single time as well. In terms of gears, I pretty much go with this setup. Again, if it's a grassy map, you can go with this. But the +1 is very underrated on Jacky. 4 gadgets, of course, very good. Next, Janet, drop the base 100%. Vocal warm up 100%. Gears, you can never go wrong with this again. But most of the time, I think you play Janet on a grassy map, so I think this setup would be vital, especially in this meta. And then with Jessie, Spark Plug everywhere except for Recalling Spring in Heist. And then, of course, Energize is going to be your better star power. Shocky is just terrible. And then again, it depends on the map and situation. You know, sometimes I play Jessie on a grassier map like Double Swoosh, but most of the time I think you play Jessie on a more open map. So you probably will opt for like this, for example, yeah, this setup in Heist. And then everywhere else, probably like something like this, because you can get a lot of kills with the slow. So now moving on to kit, starting off with the gadgets. You want to be using Cardboard Box a lot of the time. It's such a good gadget. And then Cheeseburger, of course, if you're playing a super cheesy strategy with Darryl, with Draco, etc. Any tank, Cheeseburger is going to be better. In terms of star powers, of course, Showdown, 3 versus 3. Yeah, you just literally don't even have a choice with kit. And then gears, I do go with this every single time, to be honest, because most of the time you want to get a lot of value out of the invisibility and whatever else, and of course the shield, because kit is pretty squishy. Next up, we've got Larry and Laurie. So in terms of the gadgets, you want to go with the heal every time. And then I have definitely switched with this. So of course you go protect on like knockout and bounty, but you do get a lot of value out of this, especially against tanks. Like Larry is a really good tank counter, especially now in the meta. Pros are abusing this star power, and I've started to realize that it's actually really good. And then I pretty much never switch away from damage and shield with Larry. Next up, we've got Leon. So lollipop drop all of the time. I mean, maybe if you're facing snipers and against worse players, you can get value out of this, but it's not worth it. Lollipop drop is better. And then I've actually started to swap a lot now, mainly because Leon is, I don't know, not as good in the meta anymore. So I've started to use smoke trails because he's a lot less predictable, and you can actually chain to your hypercharge easier with this star power. So I use smoke trails now, especially on more open maps. You definitely want to use smoke trails. Invisi-heal is really good as well, though. And then I pretty much never stay away from this setup. An extra 2 seconds with the mythic gear allows you to make more plays and get more value. Next up, Lily, of course, gadget number 1, 100%. Star powers, you probably want to use Spiky most of the time because of that extra DPS. I will say that this is an underrated one though, but it's pretty hard to actually get into range with Lily, so you may as well go with the extra damage. But in terms of gears, I pretty much either go damage or the shield. She does probably need the extra shield though, considering she's an assassin. Next up, we've got Lola, of course, freeze frame most of the time. But it depends what type of Lola player you are. You can get a lot of value out of Sealed with a Kiss, especially if you put your Lola clone behind. But if you like to play it in front, then Improvise is going to be really good, especially now that Lola deals a lot more damage now with the buff. It's a good combination. But of course, if you're playing Heist, you definitely want to Improvise. And then again, it can depend on what you're really playing. So inside of Heist, you want to go with this. I mean, you can never really go wrong with this setup, but Lola is really underrated on grassy maps, so a lot of times I do end up going like something like this, or just like the vision and the reload. I mean, I never really swap away from the reload, even though the clone doesn't get the reload speed buff as well. It's just still, you get value with it all the time. Next up, we've got Lou. So of course, this gadget every time, hypothermia every single time, and then I pretty much never switch away from this build. As you can see, it might be the rare instance where I play Lou on a grassy map, but you definitely want supercharge and you definitely want that extra gadget so you can cycle through to your supers and get more freezes off. Next up, Maisie. So of course, you want to go with disengage and tremors. You never want to swap away from this. And then of course, you want an extra dash as well, and then you probably want like damage, because that's the reason why you use her. You might want to go with like shield, because it's pretty hard to even get close to people anymore. Yeah, I don't know, Maisie's just pretty trash, doesn't really matter. Next up, we got Mandy. So Mandy, again, it depends on what type of Mandy player you are. I get a lot of value out of Cookie Crumbs, especially on knockout and bounty. If you're the type of Mandy player that's really good at hitting your shots and getting good slows off, then Caramelize can be really good, combined with her super as well. Both gadgets are good. It can depend on the matchup. And then of course, in my sights all of the time, and then I never swap away from these gears. I will say people are starting to switch though in terms of competitive, and people are starting to use the health gear on their snipers, especially in a sniper versus sniper interaction. So I'm going to start buying the health gear more on my snipers. Can be pretty good. And then lastly, we have Max. So Max phase shifter every time, and then pretty much 90% of the time running gun. if you're playing, I don't know, a really passive game and you're picking snipers, or if you're in a composition with like Rosa, Sandy, Jean, then supercharge can be better. And then I'll never switch away from this build, especially health and shield. It just works so well together. So now moving on to Meg, starting off with the gadget. Jolting Volts is going to be better pretty much all of the time. Toolbox can be good, especially into snipers, to tank an extra shot, but you can never really go wrong with the heal. And then in terms of the star powers, Heavy Metal is advised pretty much all of the time, mainly because it deals so much damage. It's crazy, especially now that you always have a super available as well. You know, Meg's near enough unkillable, or when she is killable, you end up dying as well. In terms of gears, I pretty much never stay away from this setup. It's just such a good combination. You do get double the value out of shield gear though, but I really like the health gear on Meg, especially because she is like 8k HP. Next up, we've got Melodie, so of course interlude and fast beats every time. And then in terms of gears, I do opt for this mainly because with Melodie, you definitely need the extra shield, and of course she's an assassin. She doesn't really deal that much damage, so yeah, I don't know, it's not really much value out of the damage gear. Next up, we've got Mico, so Clipping Screamer is by far the better gadget. There are some instances though when you know you've got a really tough matchup and you know you're not going to be able to get close to the opponents. Presto can be underrated, but Clipping Screamer is better most of the time. Of course, Monkey Business is going to be your better one overall, but then if you're playing Heist or if you're playing Showdown even, then you might want to go with this star power, and then I never swap away from this. You can never go wrong. Next up, we've got Mo. So with Mo, I will say there is a lot of value from Rat Race. I think the better gadget overall is Dodgy Digging though, but I'm starting to see a lot of value out of Rat Race, mainly because you can get a lot of value out of the dash, and you can destroy like throwers' walls, for example. It can be pretty good. Star power though is definitely Skipping Stones. I think against noobs this can be pretty good, but Skipping Stones is just better. Extra DPS and extra stone, which means you can deal so much more damage. You definitely want that. And in terms of gears, I don't think there's many gears that are actually valuable with Mo, to be honest. I am actually going to buy the vision gear as well though, because I'm starting to use Mo a lot more on the grassier maps. But yeah, most of the time you just want to go damage. It's just plain and simple. Next up, we've got Mortis, so you want to go survival shovel 100% of the time. Such a good gadget. And then coiled snake 100% of the time as well. And in terms of gears, Mythic gear is so good with the hypercharge. It's the main reason why the hypercharge is meta right now. So put the Mythic gear on straight away. You can snipe people with the hypercharge. It's just so good. And then it depends what type of Mortis player you are. You might need extra damage for interactions, but I think shield gear can help you get closer to the opponents. But yeah, it depends. If you're more aggressive Mortis player, you probably get more value out of the damage gear. Next up, we've got Mr.p. So definitely Service Belle is a better one. Sometimes you can get value out of Port Reinforcements, but this is just better overall to waste more ammo. And then, of course, Revolving Door as well. And you pretty much don't get value out of any other gear. Next up, we've got Nani. So with Nani, just depends on what game mode you're playing. War Blast on like Heist, for example. Everywhere else you probably want to use Return to Sender. Sometimes War Blast can be pretty annoying in Gem Grab for the opponent, especially if you're not facing snipers a lot. Autofocus is going to be paired well on Bounty and Knockout to get that extra damage. Tempered Steel is going to be good on Heist when you combine it with the TP gadget, and then you pretty much never want to switch away from this. I mean, some people might want to opt for the Supercharged gear, but I don't think it's really that worth it. And then next up, we've got Nita. So with Nita, both gadgets can be pretty good. Most of the time, Fofa is a better gadget overall, just so you can tank more of it else. But Bear Paws is really good into tanks and can catch the opponents by surprise. And then in terms of star powers, Bear with Me is going to be better all the time. Hyper Bear is only better in Heist. And then gears again, you might want to swap for something like this in Heist with the Hyper Bear, but pretty much everywhere else, you know, you pretty much only use Nita on grassy maps, so you need the speed and the damage. Next up, we've got Otis. So Fat Splatter and Ink Refills. You never want to switch away from that gadget and star power. And then with Otis, again, it depends on what map you play, because a lot of times you actually play Otis on grassy maps. So I end up pretty much using this setup all of the time with Otis. But again, if it's not a grassy map, you may as well just go with this combination. So now moving on to Pam. Start off with gadgets, Scrap Sucker all of the time, Mama Squeeze all of the time. And then again, I never really swap away from this setup. If it's on a super grassy map, you do get some good value out of the vision. And then you do get good value out of health as well. So there's a lot of different options. I think the one to consider though is definitely the mythic gear. It's definitely one you need to get. Then you can kind of play around with other gears if you have the spare coins. Next up we have Pearl. So this gadget and star power all of the time. I will say there's underrated use case against like tanks and stuff with this, but you pretty much use heat shield all the time with Pearl. And then again, it depends on what map you played. You guessed it. Most of the time though, you do play Pearl on more open maps, especially into snipers. So I actually need to buy the shield gear here because I actually opt for something like the damage gear and the shield gear, mainly because you're playing pretty passive with Pearl. So probably this one like knockout and bounty. You can get value out the health gear as well though, but grassy maps this can be good on Pearl. Next up we've got Penny, so salty barrel 100%. And then again, because I mainly played Master Blaster because you're probably going to face off against a lot of assassins in this meta, so it can help that extra bit of damage, that extra knockback. But then you can also get some good value from the gadget with this star power as well. It's just up to you, but I find myself using Master Blaster most of the time. And then most you just use damage and shield. I mean, sometimes you might play on a grassy map, but probably not too often to be honest. So shield, damage you can never go wrong with. Next up we've got Piper. So again, I've seen pros have started to use the health gear a lot more in a 1v1, so I'm actually going to buy the health gear with Piper. I know I thought I'd never see the day, but something like this setup is really good. The shield gear to help you in those 1v1s. The health gear, the reason why I use the health gear on the sniper in a 1v1 is so you don't lose position on the map. You know, if you get sniped once, you really have to fall back quickly, but if you got the health gear, you're able to stay up in the interaction a lot easier. And then of course with Piper, she's got two good star powers, two good gadgets. You know, most of the time on like Brawl Ball, Gem Grab, you want to either run knockback, and then homemade recipe on the longer range maps, bushy maps, ambush, snappy sniping everywhere else. But I find myself going something like, I don't know, most of the time with Piper, something like this, because you can never really go wrong with it. Next up, we've got Poco. So with Poco, tuning fork 100%. I mean, if you play ranked, protective tunes can be good to counter certain brawlers, but I don't think really a lot of what the protective tunes counters is in the meta, so I don't think you really need it. Star powers, Screeching Solo is the better one overall, I think, unless of course you go with like Poco double tank or whatever else. If you're really trying to be a healer, this can be such a good composition, especially because the hypercharge pairs really well with just trying to group up and being double Poco double tank. Next up we've got RT, so out of the line is going to be a better gadget most of the time now since the rework. I will say though, really long range maps, knockout, bounty, you're probably going to get a lot more value out of hacks. In terms of gears, star power, you want to go recording 100% of the time, of course. Again, if it's like a super long range map, you're never going to split, then you can go with quick maths, but I don't think recording definitely is the better star power because that's what everyone uses in knockout. And then in terms of your gears overall, you never want to use a damage gear because it just doesn't really work. I end up using something like this, health gear, shield gear. You can never really go wrong with RT. Next we've got Rico. So Rico has a lot of flexibility with his build. Multiple launcher is definitely the better gadget, but if you're facing tough matchups like throwers or snipers, bouncy castle is going to be still pretty good. Again, it depends on what you're facing. Most of the time, super bouncy is better. But again, if you're facing like throwers, sprout, dynamite, robo retreat, it's going to be better. In terms of gears, definitely use the reload gear. And then it's kind of up to you whether you're facing a tough matchup, whether you just want to dominate with the extra damage. Super grassy map, and of course you want to use vision. But again, don't switch off the reload speed gear because you pretty much get value out of that all the time. Next up, Rosa. So again, it can depend on what setup you're going for. I think unfriendly brushes is the better gadget overall to slow them, catch up to them, reveal them, and take them down. So yeah, that is going to be better. I use thorny gloves as well. The extra damage is very crucial in a 1v1. Plant life can be good and pretty annoying, but thorny gloves is the better one overall. And then I never really see myself switching from this. There will be the odd time where I need that extra slow on like Snake Prairie, double swoosh center stage. Maybe I want to go for something like that, but I think damage and speed you can never go wrong with. And then lastly, Ruffs. So with Ruffs, I think both gadgets can be pretty good. S support is just good for pushing the opponents back and zoning. Take cover is going to be better if you're facing off against snipers, but it's just very rare you get that kind of matchup with our Ruffs, so air support is better. Air superiority all the time. There are some cheesy strategies with this, but it's just not as good anymore. And then gears, again, it depends on whether you play like harder at mine, you want to go with this, but Ruffs is pretty squishy, so I just think you can never really go wrong with that setup. So now moving on to the last few brawlers, going with Sam. Sam's is so easy. Magnetic field, Hearty recovery, and then you pretty much grassy map and then non-grassy map. Yeah, super simple. Next up, Sandy, super simple again. Sweet dreams all of the time. Rude Sands gonna be better most of the time as well. I think healing winds can be pretty underrated, especially if you're using tanks with it. It's a lot of healing, 400 a second, but Rude Sands is gonna be better most of the time. And then with Sandy, never switch off speed and damage. The mythic gear is terrible. Do not listen to anybody that says it's good. It's terrible, okay? Stop using it. It's not good. Next up, we have Shelly. Clay Pigeons, 100%. Shell Shock, pretty much 95% of the time. It's just so good in combination with your gadget. Band-Aid, if you use Shelly on like Knockout maybe, Bounty, then Band-Aid's going to be better. But yeah, Shell Shock is definitely your better option. And again, if you play Showdown, maybe Band-Aid is better, but I don't play Showdown. And then with Shelly, you probably want to opt for something like this. I do really like the extra gadget though with Shelly, so you might want to see me go something along those lines. The extra gadget can be really good. Next up, we've got Spike. So Life Plan is definitely your better gadget. Heist, Popping Pincushion, Curveball is your better option all the time. And then Gears, Mythic Gear, and the Damage Gear with Spike, especially since he lacks the damage now. I think he definitely needs a damage. Next up, we've got Sprout. So Transplant is going to be your best option, 100%. Same with Overgrowth. You never really want to use the other builds. It's just not worth it. And then in terms of the gears, Supercharge and the Shield gear, you want to go for that. Next up, Squeak, Residue, every time. Star Powers, I see people swap between these. I think if you play Heist or like the damage, you need Chain Reaction. Super Sticky is pretty good though, especially if you're good at hitting your Squeak supers. You can just start the chain, and especially so you can get towards that hypercharge. I like super sticking most of the time. And then every time you want to use the gadget charge, and then probably like either the damage or the health. The health is super underrated on Squeak. Next up, we've got Stu. So he's really flexible in his build. I see a lot of people using Zero Drag right now. Really good at countering throwers, etc., especially with Breakthrough. Most of the time though, you want to be using Gasser Heal because that's recently been buffed. Paired with, of course, Speed Zone, you want to be using it like Gem Grab to pair with your 8-bit or mid, and you want to be using this in Hot Zone as well. Of course, on maps with a lot of walls with key areas, Breakthrough is going to be good. And then in terms of gears, I don't know, it's pretty hard to actually get the most value out of some of these gears with Stu, so I just end up going with something like this. It's just a bit hard with Stu. Next, we've got Surge. So in terms of competitive, Power Surge probably is your best bet because good players will really limit you when you're at level 1. So getting to level 2 is essential. If you mainly face off against noobs, which I do in Brawl Stars, especially even in Masters Ranked, Power Shield probably is your better option. You can make some good plays with it and deal a lot of damage. Serve Ice Cold, of course. Showdown, you want to go with this. And then Gears, again, it depends. Grassy map, go with this. Non-grassy map, go with this. And you're good to go. Next up, we've got Tara. So support from beyond all of the time. If you're playing Snake Prairie, or if you're facing off against, I don't know, like 2 lane brawlers like Buster and Sandy, you're not going to get value out of this gadget, so may as well go with this. Star Powers, again, depends what matchup you're up against. I think Healing Shade definitely is the better star power overall because you can get some good value out of it. But don't be afraid to go Black Portal, especially if you're facing off against multiple snipers. And then in terms of the gears that are best with Tara, pretty much this is the best option because you want that extra damage in a 1v1. Sometimes I do opt for the extra gadget though, so you get another pair of pets that can help you up against those snipers. Next up, we have Tick. So with Tick, Last Hurrah is going to be your better gadget overall, mainly because it can help you tank things and just be really annoying. It deals a little bit of extra damage as well. My Mania can be just good to annoy people, but yeah, only noobs use that. And then Well Oiled definitely is the better star power. I find myself using Automatic a lot though, and I think it can be underrated, but Well Oiled is your better option. And then most of the time you want to go with this setup, but if you're all on a bushy map, then you want to go with this setup instead. Vision Gear is actually pretty underrated on the Tick. And then lastly, we have Willow. So the better gadget, what the pros use, is Spellbound a lot of the time. Dive can be good against Assassins, though, to buy that time and waste some resources, but Spellbound is your better gadget. And then, again, everywhere you want to go, Love is Blind is actually underrated, and this is better in Brawl Ball to get you those quick goals. And then with Willow, yeah, you don't get much value out of a gear, so you pretty much may as well go with this setup. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Let me know whether you learned anything. There has been a few changes in the builds. For example, with my snipers now, I am starting to use the health gear a lot more. So like on Piper, I'm going to start using the health gear, and I think it's actually pretty good. So yeah, that's going to be it, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.